Well, good morning, everybody. We are into April, despite our minus weather. I hear it's going to get warmer this weekend, so hopefully it'll be okay. All right, so before we begin, I would like to respectfully acknowledge that we're located on Treaty 6 territory, a traditional gathering place for diverse Indigenous peoples, including the Cree, Blackfoot, Métis, Nakota Sioux, Iroquois, Dene, Ojibwe, Saulteaux, Anishinaabe, Inuit, and many others whose histories, languages, and cultures continue to enrich our vibrant community. I am just delighted to introduce our speaker for our professor series today. It's Dr. Karen Kroeker, and most of you will know Karen is, of course, Professor of Medicine in the Division of Gastroenterology here. She completed her Bachelor of Science and MD degrees at University of Calgary, and then her core IM at UBC. She then moved to Edmonton and did her GI residency here and an advanced clinical and research fellowship in inflammatory bowel disease. She received her Master's of Experimental Medicine at the University of Alberta in 2012 and joined our faculty in 2010. She is obviously a member of our medical staff at the University Hospital. She was a program director for the GI program from 2015 to 2022, brought CBD live to the program, and still remains actively involved in teaching residents, fellows, and graduate students. Her research interests include IBD, clinical outcomes, pediatric transition, and mental health. And it's really timely, the topic she's talking about, graduate student supervision, pearls and pitfalls, because as we know, there is some talk about the graduate program going through some transition. We have a very strong graduate program within the Department of Medicine because of supervisors like Karen. So just keep an eye out for announcements about some transitions that are going to be happening with the graduate program. And I should mention that Dr. Kroeker actually won our departmental mentorship award last year. So she knows what she talks about. So I'll call her over now. Thanks, Karen.
Thanks, Norman. It's actually a pleasure to present rounds today. And so my first love of research is actually pediatric IBD transition, but I didn't think this group would actually care about that as much as I do. So I thought I'd talk about this because this was kind of my pathway to promotion, given this is my professional round. And so, page down. Maybe I'll click here. So in terms of this presentation, actually I have no potential or actual conflicts of interest to disclose. And so mostly because nobody really sponsors you to be a graduate student, a graduate supervisor. So in terms of my objectives, I want people to understand how graduate supervision can lead to academic success and promotion, and then talk about keys to mentoring successful graduate students, and then some pitfalls you can see. And then my secret agenda is actually to convince you that you should consider doing this, whether or not you're a resident that's considering an academic career, or if you're a junior faculty member, or even if you're a senior faculty member. This is actually a really fun and rewarding way to give back and to be an educator kind of thing, and a researcher. So a little bit about me. I was actually born in Calgary. I don't really cheer for hockey, so I don't cheer for the Flames, so that's good. And my family is really non-medical, so I kind of fell into a medical career kind of just by happenstance kind of thing, and ended up doing my Bachelor of Science and my MD degrees at U of C, and then actually did some research experience. So I actually got a job working in research with some animal work, and then also with some qualitative things, but I'll talk a little bit about more of that later. And I kind of remember Calgary when this is how old I am, is that I remember Calgary when the Calgary Tower was tall, and it was bigger than any building down there. So it's actually sort of sad for me to go home and see that all the buildings have dwarfed it now. And so in Vancouver, I actually matched to UBC for internal medicine, and this is where I really developed my foundation in clinical medicine. And then I actually had a research project, because you always want to have to do research to get into a specialty program. So I had a research project that I did about liver transplant. And the reason that I came here to Edmonton is actually I thought I was going to be a transplant hepatologist. And so over the time, I actually did meet other mentors who convinced me that IBD would be a better path for me. And so I ended up doing an advanced IBD fellowship here. And as part of that, Dr. Fedoruk, who was the program director, told me I had to do a master's. So it was like an expectation. So I'm like, okay, I guess I'll get a master's. And so I applied for funding, and I did a project. And then, and I learned how to kind of do that kind of thing. And then I was hired on as faculty. And then first as a year of clinical faculty, and then I became on the academic staff. But I don't know that when I thought about going into medical school way back in Calgary, that I actually thought about being an academic physician at all. I think I wanted to be a doctor and I wanted to take care of patients, but I didn't really know about the academic life, to be fair. And so why academia? I actually found out over time that opportunities to grow, learn, and teach. And that my mother always taught me a change is as good as a rest. And actually, I think the variety of work that you get to do as an academic actually really keeps me invigorated, not only in my clinical life, but also in my academic work. And then, of course, then you want to be like your mentors. And so I think sometimes that's exactly, you're like, you admire people, and so you want to be like them. So that's why I did this. And so research supervision is because I had some research experience. I actually had when I was getting my master's. And then I actually was mentored by others to do this. And I thought it was an opportunity to give back to this and to academia. And so I think the key to success is the willingness to invest in others, having mentorship and support of your program director, of your division director, of your chair, of different people within your department. And then I think you really have to be resilient. And so this is how someone used to describe me, is that you could try to knock me down, but I always bounce back up. So in terms of academic domains, I always feel like this is kind of what we expect of us. So in terms of clinical, when you're an academic, they expect us to be competent, collegial, and a team member. They want us to have scholarship, and they want us to be leadership. So for research and education and admin, those are the other kind of domains of this. And so if you look at this is where I see that research training is where they overlap for both research and education pillars. And so this is an opportunity to have grad students, is actually for you to kind of knock off areas in both domains. And so in terms of the FEC expectations for like research training in education, they actually want us to supervise trainees. They want our trainees to publish. They want them to present, and they want them to get funded and get awards. And then you want them to actually finish and graduate in time. And then obviously, if you're going to research, if you're doing the training and the mentoring, the graduate supervision, both MSc and PhD students, and as well as participating in supervisory committees. So I really found that this was a way for me to actually have an academic career and kind of meet both education and research things. And I think actually at the core, I am actually an educator. And I think this is why I don't really have a big lab. And part of my projects are always picked to help support the residents to develop this training. So and then obviously I was program director. So that was another way in which I did it. So these are kind of my early mentors. And I'm well aware that 3 of them have passed away, which makes me feel old and a little bit sad. But the first person that actually took me in before I did finish my science degree, I actually worked in the summer lab for a doctor named Sam Lee, who actually taught me. I applied for funding, and I did some research basics, and I made rats cirrhotic by ligating their bile duct. I'm going to tell you that research was not as successful as maybe my later projects, because we actually never published it, but it was still a really great learning experience. And I learned a lot from him about how you invest in students. So next of all, I don't know if anyone knows Grant Gall. He was the Dean of Medicine in Calgary for a time, and he was good friends with Dr. Meddings. And Dr. Fedoric and Dr. Bailey, if anyone knows them. And I was a research assistant in his lab. And he taught us about leading a lab. He had very high expectations. We needed to present, we needed to whatever. And it was the first time I got invited to present at an international meeting was with my work there. And so we talked about conducting research, and his expectations were very high, but it was a very good learning experience. And so I actually didn't know that I really liked animal research. And so I actually went on and worked with a guy named Bob Johnson, who is actually an emergency physician in Calgary. And he was rolling out telehealth in the Calgary Health region. And so there was a time when telehealth was a big deal. It was long before Zoom. And so he hired me to be his research assistant to like evaluate this. And he was the most kind and professional person I probably worked with. I just remember everybody knew him in the hospital, and the way he greeted everyone was just the highest of standards. And so I really cherished the time I spent with him. And then obviously when I came here, Richard Fedoric became my mentor for clinical work, for research, and probably even for life. And so he was really big on investing in others. And he always told me, he's like, at his stage of career, people don't judge him on his success. They judge him on the success of the people that he's trained. And so I've kind of tried to work on that principle to see if I can try to live up to his expectations, which were high. So that first project I ever published was in gut, which was actually quite exciting. I was a little bit upset because it was my project and still my research supervisor got the more senior person in the lab to be the first author. So I was still a little cheese back then, but I didn't really know anything about publishing papers at the time.
A huge impact factor.
It does, yes. And then I actually did with the work with Dr. Johnson, we actually trained about residency training via video conference. We did a survey kind of project. And then when I went on in Vancouver, I wanted to get into GI and I wanted to be a liver transplant person. And so I did a survey project again with Dr. Yoshida and Dr. Bain. And so that was a good project for me. And then when I was a resident here, I did this project, and this is the first time where I actually kind of supervised somebody myself. And so Simon Lamb, who's now a pediatric GI in Calgary, he was a medical student that I recruited to help me review charts. And so that was kind of my first foray into being a research supervisor. So basically I've divided what graduate student supervision into 4 phases. And so the 4 phases are you're planning ahead. And then you have to recruit people. You have to find the right candidate. You have to set goals and expectations. You have to do the work. So there's a lot of work in doing it. So even though these are all equal, the work put in this is not equal. And then you help them graduate, meeting those deadlines, and help them with postgraduate planning, because these are people that you're mentoring to kind of be to the next level. So I always think in terms of planning ahead, why do you want to have a grad student? And then the other thing is, do you have the required skills or resources to do this? So if you're passionate about research or training, if it's required for your job description, as you probably know, if you have greater than 30% of time for research, you're actually required to have grad students. If it's greater than 60, you have to have PhD students. And if you have a research project or idea that's suitable for a project. And so the one thing is you want to make sure this project is doable within the projected time. So an MSc is generally 2 to 3 years and a PhD is 3 to 6 years. And so you can't give them a 10-year project and think they're going to finish it. And then in terms of skills, do you have an MSc or PhD or the research skills and experience? Because you actually don't, as medical doctors, you actually don't have to have an MSc to supervise an MSc student, but you do need a co-supervisor. So if this is your first student at the U of A, you have to have a co-supervisor. And that's because I always tell students, you're not getting a degree with my name on it, you're getting a degree with the U of A on it. And it's to make sure that you actually follow the rules, because there's a lot of rules, and the rules at different schools are very different. And then do you have the resources? Do you have funding? So in order to have a research student, you actually have to have money in your account, or they have to be funded. And so you need about $30,000 a year. And so I always call, like, I don't know, you'll learn a bit more about DomGrad later today. I call them like many times. I'm like, how much money do I need to get in my bank? And so before I can hire somebody, because they won't let you recruit somebody unless you have the funding to pay them. And then you have to have a project and funding to do the research. And so you could be funded with your research projects, which I'm sure if people are doing a lot of research, they are. And then you have to have the patient population or the lab or whatever resources to run that research, that to allow the recruitment or the studies to happen. There's actually a lot of supervisory guidelines. And so there's actually, you have to provide an environment that's conducive to research. And this is for them to grow intellectually. You have to provide guidance. You have to be accessible. You have to establish a realistic timeline, which is probably the hardest thing to do with a grad student, because they all think that they're going to change the world in their project, and they probably won't. But it's really important to consider them a junior colleague. And so you have to make sure that this is about them and that they are actually not your assistants. They are a junior colleague. And you have to have enough material and resources to actually help them. And then you have to work and establish a supervisory committee. And then you have to maintain open communication, and you have to be able to resolve conflicts, because they will probably come up. So then I've divided into pearls and pitfalls. And so the pearls are the girl and the boy is falling into the pitfall, but that is not intentional. This is just the thing I found. So I think this is probably the most important part of planning ahead, is having defined goals. So a project idea, you should have some skill or knowledge acquisition. And so you want them to actually be able to, after this project, to actually have something to take forward. That's always been my goal, whether it's you need to know how to do a systematic review, or you need to know how to like get ethics approval. You need to know how to like do research interviews or to do statistics. And so I always want them to have a skill that even it's beyond their project, they're going to have something more than actually their project. It's not just about the publication. That's kind of the cherry on top, but really it's the skill and the knowledge that you want them to have that I think is probably what sets them apart for them to actually do more research and to develop those skills later on. And so if you don't have those goals, or if they don't have the same goals and they just want to do this to have that check mark, they're never going to go forward and do more research. So you need to have the fundings that we talked about. And then you need to be aware of your responsibilities. And so there's this website at the bottom that tells you all your responsibilities. And you have to know the grad advisor for the Department of Medicine is actually like your best friend, to be honest. And so a pitfall is that if it's not feasible, so if it's too big, it's too unwieldy, or it's too small that it actually wouldn't, the supervisory committee doesn't actually think it merits a degree. If they apply for funding and they don't get funded, there's a chance that they're going to be quite disappointed. And so it's really important that you're clear if their project is not funded, if they have a job or not. And so ideally, I never wanted to be in that situation. So I always tried to have the money available so that even if they didn't get the funding, or if they only got partial funding, that you actually can support them through their training. Because it's really hard for people to like, oh, I didn't get the money and now I can't do this project. Is very not fun. And then think about the timing of the start date. So fall and winter courses sometimes go fall and then winter. So if you want to do EPI 1 and EPI 2, it's usually fall and winter, or Stats 1 and Stats 2, it's fall and winter. So if they start in the winter, you can get into trouble sometimes. And then the deadlines, you have to really know what the deadlines are. And it's different for international students. They require additional time, and then really the funding for to support them. How do you find the right candidate? And set the goals and expectations. So this is the recruitment part of being a student. So you have to consider prior academic success. You can look at their research success if sometimes they've done a project as an undergrad or they have a project from before. They've also, if they've had funding before, they've gotten research support in the past. And are they a really good fit for this project? And so you have to think, is this a project they do by themselves? Or is this a project they need to collaborate with other people? Is this part of a larger part of your research grant? And so you have to make sure how they fit in. And is there any opportunity for them to tailor the project to have more academic input? So you have to really think about when you're recruiting people, do they fit with that goals that you have? And so this is what you talk about when you meet them. And does it fit for your style of supervision? So as a busy clinician, I actually have to have students that are actually quite self-motivated and do things on their own. And so I say, I'm like, I will meet you once a week, but I can't hold your hand every day. And so that doesn't work for my style of supervision. And so I'm there, whatever, you can email me, you can text me anytime, but I can't, do all the stuff for you. And then check references. So, and then you want to understand their goals for completing this degree. Why do they want to do it? Like, what's their goals? And so you can help make sure these are a match. Are they actually interested in the project that you're on? So if you don't like pediatric transition IBD, then you probably are not good for my lab. And so just because that's the kind of work that I like to do. And then you want to talk about what's the expected output or timeline. So do I expect you to present or publish? And then is there any kind of lab group responsibilities? Do you need them to do a part of their time in terms of like ordering supplies or supervising others or mentoring other students? It's good to tell them about those expectations. And then work hours. And so I think this came, like one of my grad students started in January of 2020. So as you know, the pandemic hit, 2-3 months later. And so it was really the first time, like before that, I always had students that were in person. And then it was like, how do you work out this virtual in-person hybrid? And so, but it actually, as long as you set those expectations, I think it actually can work out quite well. And then there's a first conversation checklist. So first of all, I want to do shout out to the department, like over the time that I've had grad students, the supports that they do to help us for them, both for FSGR as well as for DOM, have vastly improved. And so it's actually way easier. It's way easier to do it in this way because it's actually, it's a little bit more plug and play, and they're doing more stuff now. And so this is why I would say you're not alone. These people will help you. There's associate chairs as well as the graduate program advisor in the FOMD. And they I don't know how many emails, I actually looked for how many emails I've sent them over the years, and there's a lot. And so, but they're so helpful. I call them, I email them, and they've been really great. And so this is the there's a checklist that you can do, and you go through a bunch of topics. And this is actually really important. And in some ways, it's actually serves as a model for any kind of research project you might want to do with any kind of student, because it talks about a number of things that are really important, like who's who in the department, what kind of registration or academic requirements are done. And so for a long time, there was just an ethics requirement. Now there's an academic citizenship requirement. There's a professional development plan they need to create. And this is really important because I think that the U of A has really pushed for our students to not just do a degree for a degree's sake, but to do a degree to lead to something, to help prepare them for the world and for other kind of academic or career pursuits. And so I think the funding, you need to make it clear if it's guaranteed or not. And then it's really important to talk about intellectual property guidelines, the practice of authorship, who's first, what order they're going to be, how you're going to acknowledge them. And I think that checklist actually takes you through some of those things. But it's really important for you to know, because those are some of the things that actually lead to conflicts in the lab if people don't know what they're going to get out of that project, if they're going to get first author or second or co-first, or what kind of thing they're going to get. And this actually helps to drive you to have those discussions. And I think even if you have students that are residents or med students, you're doing this, it's really important to have this discussion up front so people know what their acknowledgement will be. And then it's important to know the thesis requirements and then tell them about other resources, the Academic Success Center, the GSA, the Career Center, and the Ombudsman for Students. So in terms of recruitment pearls and pitfalls, so be careful in selection, CV transcripts, references. Consider a trial period. So if you don't know them at all, you don't know them great, one way to actually take them on is just have them as a summer student. So summer students fellowships are really easy to get funding, and you can assess their abilities. You kind of get assessment. Do they work well with you? Do you work well with them? It's kind of like a locum in some ways, a summer student. It's 4 months, it's defined period, and you can see if this actually works. And so that's often a good way to test them out. Then you get a referral from colleagues. So this is RJB, or Dr. Bailey. And so Dr. Bailey, I'm going to confess, has sent a number of grad students my way. He was a coach of the University Ringette team, and he would screen people and send them over. And if you look at the Division of Gastroenterology in general, we've trained a lot of Ringette students for graduate students, and mostly because this is our pipeline, is Dr. Bailey would often send us students. This person's really good and they're very smart, and so he would tell us about people, and so we're really grateful to him for providing us with those students. He no longer coaches, so I don't know where I'm going to find more students, but I found other students other ways too. And then the thing to really remember is that this is their education. It's not about the research, it's about their education. And so they are not research assistants. They are there to do a project and you will get stuff out of it because it's really fun to help people, but it's not about you, it's about them. And so the one other pitfall that you can have is they don't have a good GPA, or they don't have the prerequisites, that they won't maybe get the funding. And it's really important to manage those expectations. And they might be unable or delayed in their finishing. So that might be grades, they might have personal or family reasons, they might have competing interests or goals. And so it's kind of challenging sometimes, is that it's not every student will finish. And I think you have to prepare yourself for that. And then you have to remember, you also have to recruit people to help you. And it's really important to consider their expertise and availability when you're actually recruiting those, to kind of fill in gaps of the project that you might not be as good at, to really help you. So I'm going to talk a bit about lessons learned. So this is my first graduate student. And so this is Dr. Krista Reish. And so she's actually a geriatrician in Calgary. And she told me, she said, I asked permission to give her picture, use her picture. And she's like, I'm applying for my first CIHR grant. So she's super excited, and she's getting married. So she sent this picture, and was a really great student. So she had a really defined project, and I had funding for that project. And so I didn't worry about her. She did apply for funding and got partial funding at least. And then she also got travel awards. And just to remember, travel awards are super easy for students to get. So don't be afraid of them presenting their work. You really want them to get that experience. And so she gave an oral presentation at DDW, which is a big meeting, and it was really exciting for her to develop during her time. And then she was co-supervised because she was my first student. So Dr. Fedoruk was my co-supervisor. And so she was referred by someone I trust, Dr. Bailey. And actually she did a summer student project with me first. And so I was able to assess her work ethic and abilities. And she was like, really great a student for me to have to start out. So I'm going to say my second one was not as successful, and I won't put their picture or name because this one wasn't as successful. And this is kind of the pitfalls. And so I met her and I thought she seemed great. She talked about a project, and then I realized she actually didn't meet the application criteria. So she only got a conditional acceptance, and they may actually put the requirement that she'd have 2 grad student courses in the fall with a minimum average of a B. And I said, well, that's kind of interesting. I said, I didn't know that you wouldn't meet these criteria. And so I raised the bar up a bit. We talked about it, and I said, you need to have a B+. And she's like, sure, I'm sure I can get a B+. And I'm going to tell you, she didn't meet that bar. And so this led for a very difficult conversation where I talked to her and I said, you haven't met the bar. And so actually I let her go, but she actually transferred to another supervisor. And I think she finished her master's with someone else in my division. I paid for part of her funding. That wasn't the part. And I think she works in the industry now, but and I just think it's some of it I probably didn't know as much, and so I've learned a lot through that, and it's really important to select carefully. So in terms of lessons, another lesson learned, this is Dr. Alex Dietrich, and so I was really careful in selection this time. She was referred by Dr. Bailey. She did a summer student project with me, and her project was really going well. And then she got into medical school, and they wouldn't let her defer. And so she was very upset, and I understand. And she's like, I have to choose. And I'm like, well, it's your choice. Like, this is your life. And I'm like, and I don't know that I would choose finishing a grad project over medical school either. And so, and I'm going to tell you though, she finished her project and she published over time. She didn't get the degree, but she did put a lot of work into it, which is hard to do when you're a busy medical student. And so, this was really important. So it's really important to remember this is their decision. You need to be a counselor sometimes. You need to provide support. And then in terms of the expectations, I think we just talked about, well, can you finish this project, or do I need to find somebody else to finish this project? And she assured me she would get it done, and she was able to do that, which was really great. And so in terms of the work is the next phase. So in terms of the work, there's a number of things you need to do. So you have to remember they have their professional development and ethics. There's academic citizenship, which is the U of A's thing, which is good. They need to attend medical grand rounds or some sort of rounds. This is the expectation of the Department of Medicine. And then in terms of coursework, we need to decide on this. And this is really important. They do critical reading or thinking, that they have some background knowledge. So this stats course is real, and it's really important for them to gain the knowledge and skills to do the project. And they need to prepare and defend the thesis. So in terms of the protocol, you have to develop a protocol, and I tried to have a project to define or to like through ethics, all these things. Like you need to, for a summer student, you need to have the project approved, and you need to have ethics approval before they can start. But I think this is a skill to apply for ethics and operational approval and administrative approval. And so I actually try not to do that for them because I want them to learn so that they can go on and teach that. And so one of my grad students, I'm going to tell you, she's now a medical student, and she's teaching one of the R2s about how to do a project. So she's, behind in her medical training, but this is how you do it. This is how you get your operation approval. This is how, and they actually, because they've learned to do it, they can actually teach others. So you have to work on your methodology and your approvals, and then recruitment of their studies. And then, I don't know if you guys all know about AHS data and analytics, formerly DIMER. And then you need to do data analysis and dissemination. And so they all need to present at Department of Medicine Research Day, submit their work for that, as well as other conferences and publications. So in terms of the pitfalls and the pearls, NACTRAC and FOMD and the clinical trial office resources have templates. They have the whole approval information. And so this is actually, so Dr. Fedoruk used to be the director of NACTRAC, which is how I learned all of my stuff. He's like, you just go here and this shows you, and this is a protocol you can download and you can edit to make your project. And so I think it's always surprises me that people don't know about all of the resources that the U of A and the department has to support projects, which is great. Another pearl is that you can get your resident or students to do a directed reading course. So if there's no course in the catalog that actually meets their needs, you can actually develop a course and be a course instructor yourself. So you create your curriculum, you create the metrics, you create a schedule, and then usually you meet with them every 2 weeks and they present a written thing and they do an oral presentation and you discuss the stuff. And so this is actually a really great way to kind of tailor their education. And so it's work, but it's actually really good. And then the School of Public Health has tons of great resources, even though they say they have all these prerequisites. When you're often they can get in. They just need the consent of the supervisor, of the instructor. And so I'm going to say I've almost always been able to get my students into, they have to sometimes go and talk to them and they have to like share their experiences. They don't always have their prerequisites. And so for me, one of the best courses that's been, because I really like qualitative research, is this SPH 623, which actually is a really great course. And then it's important to collaborate. So within our division, we have a clinical epidemiologist that works with us, and she has been a great support for helping with with grad student projects. The one thing in terms of the pitfalls is that keeping your student on track is really important and it's really hard. So they should always create and update their Gantt chart. And I always say, put buffer time into it. I'm like, nothing happens the way you think it will. Projects always, it's kind of like doing construction. If anyone's ever done construction in their home, projects never finish on time. And so it's really important to do that. And then warning about aspects beyond your control. And so this is probably the most frustrating thing for students. They're waiting for AHS data. The analyst, you don't control them. They give you data when they want to give you data. It can be very, very frustrating. They're like, they promised it to me by the end of the month. And then like, where did it happen? Oh, they said it's going to be another 6 weeks. And so it can be quite frustrating sometimes. And then in terms of collaborators, we've tried projects with multi-center recruitment, and it can be very frustrating because you're waiting on even if you do all their ethics approvals, you do all the stuff there, it actually can be frustrating sometimes because you are reliant on local people. And then that coursework timing I talked about, if the course you want them to do EPI 1 and EPI 2, you have to take it fall, winter, that sort of thing. And then not all courses are always offered. So you're like, this is a really great course. Like they had a systematic review course you could take, and then it's not offered every term. In fact, I'm not sure it's being offered at all anymore, which is too bad because it was a really great course. So in terms of lesson learned, I had a student, she's now a family doctor out in Hamilton, and she was very ambitious. And so she's like, I really want to do epidemiology 3 because that's really the kind of work that I want to do. She had not passed epidemiology 1 or 2, but she got the consent. And so to do this one course, she spent 30 hours a week on this, which makes it a very ambitious thing. And then it was a pass-fail course, just so you know. So she did pass, and she's like, but she learned a ton in that course. Dr. Goodman teaches that class. And then we had some challenges with collaboration. So she did a project and we collaborated with somebody that we probably didn't research well enough on the internet, because he actually at one point served us with legal action, which was actually a very stressful time for both myself and for her. And so I'm going to say, this is when I called my mentor. I'm like, oh my God. I'm like, I don't think we did anything wrong. And so I called Dr. Fedorik and he's like, just pay the money. I know you're in the right, just pay the money. And so it was really important to have those people that support and help you. And so he was really great in terms of helping us. And this did go away. And it turns out he has served legal action on 1 million people. And so never use his medication adherence scale is my advice to you. I learned that the hard way. The other thing too was another grad student that I had, and he actually did a directed reading course. And so we actually published this paper, and this public paper has been my highest reference paper. I think it's over 2,000 citations. And this was a paper that he did as his directed reading course. And so review papers are often highly cited, but it was actually, it actually helps. If you do a project early, they get a publication early, it helps them to get funding for future things. And so if you have any kind of publication, so if you get them to do a scoping or systematic review or some sort of review article, which the librarians will help you with your search, they're really awesome to helping students. It can really help them get a publication that actually can help them get other projects or funding down the road. So it's really good. And then we had to really learn to be patient and waiting for his data. So I'm going to tell you, I asked him for his picture. He didn't send it to me. So I think he's busy. He's actually a PhD student then. And so the fourth stage is the graduation. So meeting deadlines. You really want them to complete the research and disseminate it. You need to like meet the FSGR website with thesis requirements. You need to be aware of convocation deadlines. And then post-grad planning. This is probably, and the U of A will say you are not responsible for them after, but after you've been working with someone for 2 to 6 years, you kind of have invested a lot in them. And so I think, it's not your responsibility, but I think most people would feel some sort of, moral obligation or like mentorship kind of obligation to help them. And so this might be to lead to further academic work. They might go work in industry or professional training. And so I think it's really important that you don't ignore this part of the training process. They're going to use you as career advice, ongoing discussions about their aspirations and development. And so I'll talk about a few pitfalls or pearls. So the pearls is that now the exams can be on Zoom, which has actually been really helpful. So you can recruit arm's length examiners, external examiners from all over. And so used to, if you were going to bring somebody in, you would actually have to pay for their flights, you have to pay for their travel, for them to come. And so now, and it's also a lot of time out of their schedule. So now you're able to recruit people to be your examiners from other parts of the country or the world. Time zones can make it challenging sometimes in scheduling those exams, but it actually has been really helpful. So I'm going to say the Zoom option has been a really great thing for graduate student work. The other thing too is when you have a PhD graduate, you can actually participate in the ceremonial procession. And so I did that for the first time this year, which was actually quite exciting. And then I always say, don't forget to celebrate. This is a really big deal, finishing a master's or a PhD. And so usually we would plan some sort of celebration with our research group. And then the other pitfall about this is once they're done, it's really hard to get them to finish their projects because they really focused on getting their thesis done. And so it might be challenging to get them to publish their work after convocation. And then the other pitfall is that these guidelines and requirements are always changing. So it's really important to keep up to date. I'm going to say most of the changes that I've seen over the last 15 years have all been positive changes to help support the residents further or the students go further. And that's the pitfall. So I'll talk about more lessons learned. So we talked before about Reed, who's a great student, published, but then his main project at the end wasn't published. And then he went on to do his PhD. And so he had bigger fish to fry. And so the project just sat there. And then I had Caitlin, who was another student. So she's now a medical student in our faculty. And she actually is like finished her project and then wanted to work for a year as a research assistant. So she worked with Reed to actually finish his project and get it published. And so it was really important to clarify authorship order. And so because she was really instrumental, she became second author and but it was his main thesis. And she was totally on board with this too. She's like, no, this is totally his project. I understand that he will be first author. And so it was, I think, really important to clarify that in advance. And then it actually helped her publish more of her paper. And so one of her papers was just accepted for publication this week. So it's always really exciting to continue to work with these students. So the other thing to remember is I only have one PhD student. I never set out to have a PhD student. I'm going to be full, but my student wanted to transfer to the PhD program. And since I don't have a PhD, I had to get a co-supervisor to co-supervise the PhD. And so there's a number of extra things. So they need to do a candidacy exam. And this is their oral exam to determine if they're prepared to continue. And they have to do a grant proposal and an oral defense. And then you have to get 2 arm's length examiners, and these all need to be approved. And then you need to recommend an exam chair, although I have to say the department, they actually always find one for you. And then for the thesis defense, you need an external examiner. And this is probably in my type of research with qualitative metrics, there's not a lot of people that have PhDs and have supervised enough grad students for them to be approved to do this. And so in order to get somebody the external exam approved, they had to have current scholarly publications. They have to have lots of experience with supervision and examinations of doctoral students. And so it's actually we worked really hard to find somebody, and they can have zero association with you or your student. And so they can't have been a arm's length examiner before. And so this can be quite a bit of work depending on your field to get the right person for this. So that can be challenging. And then the chair, once again, the department is really good at helping you with that. And then they give a presentation. So this was my first PhD student, and so I needed to have a co-supervisor. And then because she applied for more funding, we had to do a lot of applications for her funding. And then it's really important to remember their educational needs. And so one of the things is that, you really want them to go to conference presentations. And so she went and presented her work at a number of international conferences, so which she can get some funding. And, but you need to support them to do this. And then she's like, I really want the experience of supervising a summer student. So she supervised a summer student who actually, I understand this person is now transferring to the PhD program in Calgary. So she actually has gone on to do research as well. And she learned a little bit of how much work it is to have a student. She's like, I didn't know it was this much work. I'm like, yeah. And so it was actually a really good learning experience for her. And then I think she was really good at converting challenges to opportunities. We were planning to do a study here, but because of COVID and because virtual technology was better, because she did semi-structured interviews with patients, she was able to recruit people from other sites, because anyone can do a virtual interview. So this was really good. And so then I think the last thing is that when you're a supervisor and you've never done this before, it's really important for you to have mentorship and training for us. And so there is actually graduate supervisors that there's resources through FSGR. The DOM offers multiple workshops, grad student supervision, and mentorship. So these courses are really important to take because they are here to help us. And so I think this is one of the greatest things about working here at the U of A is that the number of supports and the things that we have to support us in our academic journey is really important. And then mentorship from colleagues. And so this was the mentor for my life, Dr. Fedoruk, and this is me laughing at him and him smirking. But it really is a thing that to help you through all this process. So I'm going to say it does take a village. And so these people have all been really instrumental in helping me. Obviously, we've talked about Dr. Fedoruk. Karen Madsen used to be a graduate advisor. She's a basic science researcher in the division of gastroenterology. And so she's also great in terms of helping you with managing student problems, issues when you're not having things aren't going well. And even in terms of project design. Karen Goodman is a clinical epidemiologist in our division. So she does a lot of H. pylori research. And so she is very particular in how we report statistics and epidemiology, but you have to know if you do it her way, it will be correct. And so she is an amazing resource that we have in our division. And then Dr. Wine, because my work is with pediatrician, A10-1 is a pediatric GI and has a PhD. And so he was my co-supervisor. I'm sad to say that he has now been recruited away to be the head of GI at Sick Kids. And so he is leaving our university. And then I really want to say a shout out to the grad program advisors. So Maggie Hill, Barb Thompson, and Julian. You don't know how much support we get from them to help you with the grad students, and they're very much supportive of our students. So really, DomGrad at U Alberta, I've emailed them 100 times. So last thing I want to say, pearls and pitfalls. It's really been a privilege for me to serve as a graduate student supervisor. It's really rewarding work to work so closely with these students. And it's really important to think about equipping them with the skills and knowledge to take forward into the world. And then remember that you're not alone. There's lots of resources. And that there's training and mentorship, which will help you along the way. And then the other thing too is if you have a lot of grad students or more than one, the near peer research, near peer mentorship of them to say, oh, this is how you get this kind of stuff, or this is how you get, oh, call this person, they will get you in to get your administrative approval. So they actually are like resources amongst themselves. And so that's actually important. That it's a little bit, I think if you have 10 kids, you can get your kids to raise each other. But if you have just one, you have to raise them all yourself. But I don't have any children. And then a pitfall is that not all students will finish. And then you need to really encourage them to add buffer time for their unexpected delays. There's many pitfalls. You need to be prepared, many difficult conversations, unexpected challenges that you'll along the way. And so I just want to give a shout out to, so Krista Reich, yeah, so she's a geriatric medicine doctor, and so she is in Calgary. And then my other one is Alex Dietrich is actually an advanced pulmonary fellow. So she's actually getting a lung transplant fellowship right now, and I think CF as well. And then Natalie is a family physician. And it's funny, I ran into her in the airport in Calgary last year, just randomly. I was staring at this cute kid and I realized it was hers. And then Reed has actually gone on to do a PhD in AI, artificial intelligence. And then Caitlin is she's a medical student here, so she's in their first year. And then Allison, after her PhD, is working in industry, doing more research. And then you realize how much industry will get paid them to do the research. And I'm like, I've trained you for all these skills, and now there's a lot of money in industry, which is surprising. So this is the summary. Don't forget to plan ahead, to recruit the right people, to work, help them through their job, and then work with their graduation and planning, post-grad planning. And so with that, I'm going to end. And so thank you for everyone for listening.
Thank you, Karen. That was amazing. Are you going to stop sharing the screen, Beck?
Oh, I
Yeah. Or yeah,
I can do that.
and then that way they can see you.
Okay, perfect.
So some amazing things. I mean, this was basically grad student 101, and you really injected the enthusiasm of why we should have grad students. So just a couple of things. That $30,000 per year, that's actually a very Department of Medicine specific. And I credit our graduate directors for bringing that in, because grad students, they're on the poverty line.
Yeah.
Exactly. So we have put in this minimum. The university minimum, I think, is now 26,000 or 25,000. Yeah, it's so I'm very proud that the department has done that. And I agree with our grad administrators are amazing, Julian and the team led by Eleni. But I also need to give a shout out to our grad directors, which are Gopi Sutendra and Nadia Giroudi, who are amazing at finding, they meet with every Department of Medicine grad student. I mean, we have over 100, right? Between masters, PhD, PDFs, and so on. They meet with every one of them. Just a couple of things. So first of all, I was really happy to hear you talk about the mentorship post completion, because our grad program went through accreditation. It's an informal accreditation. It's not like a formal, Royal College or anything like that. But it is an informal institutional accreditation. And one of the things that came back was that we probably don't do enough in terms of career mentorship and things like that. And then it came back again with my review a few weeks ago that we need to do a better job mentoring our grad students. So I want to ask you a little bit about that in terms of how you think we can do better for the program as a whole. And then the second question is, the majority of your students ended up going into medicine. Mm-hmm. And I wonder if you could comment on whether grad programs have become sort of an entry into medical school, and what your thoughts are about that. And then I do have a third question, but I'll wait on that one. So
I think the question about the feeder, if you go, Laura Stovall presents the stats of the medical students, and you can see that the number of master's and PhD students entering medical school is going up. And so I think, it's possible. I think to some degree, and the biggest thing is that to remember, because we want people to be academics. This is part of our goal, is to grow people that do research. I think the earlier you do research in your training, the less likely you are to do it as your career, which is different. But I think for me, I always wanted to teach them skills so that hopefully they would apply it. So this is why I'm super excited that my first student is applying for CIHR, which I think I don't mind if you go into medical school and after doing a thing, and if you're going to go on to be an academic, because that's kind of what I'm trying to teach you to be. And so I think there probably is some role for that. And I think sometimes there is a lot of, in medical school, and they're working on this, is they're trying to get people from diverse backgrounds to get into, and I think sometimes there's a lot of advantages that people that have wealthier physician parents actually have that other poor students have. And so I think some of my grad students are variable economic backgrounds. And so I think that's the one thing where I feel like it's kind of helps equalize the playing field a little bit. They do have access to meet people and maybe see themselves to be doctors or to be whatever. So I feel like it might be, but I think I'm okay with that.
And then the first question around mentorship.
Oh, yes, what we
yeah.
should do. I think some of what it is that I think having too many graduate students would make it hard for me to do this because I think I really feel like you should invest in your students. And I think probably there should be, we could do kind of like meet and greet teas where you have like where we talk and there could be things where we discuss this because I'm going to say sometimes it is really challenging because they don't know what they're going to do with it. They don't actually see all the potential opportunities. And so my student that's working in industry, she is doing qualitative research. She works for a female-run like boutique firm that does research and projects. And she's like, I think I'm the most qualified qualitative researcher they have. And then she's basically been working there less than a year. She's like, they continue to give her raises, they continue to support her. But I don't know that she thought about this. And so for the last probably year and a half, maybe longer, we talked about what are you going to do? And it's hard because I think there's many things. It's like, what do you want to do with this? Do you want to go be do you want to be a junior professor? Do you want to go into industry? Do you want to go into medicine? And so I think it does prepare them in different ways, but I think some of those is the discussion and you have to it's about us as I think the supervisors to be mentoring them in that way.
Yeah, but there's probably more we could do as a department.
Yeah, I think, I agree.
We have a pretty organized grad student program in the sense that, there's an elected president and things I think we just need to harness that a little bit better, probably, right? Before I go online, Aminu.
Thank you very much, very useful presentation. I think this should be part of the orientation for new faculty members whenever they come on board.
Yeah.
So I have a question and a comment. One is about the retention. I'm so glad to see you highlighted some of the students that started with you, but they're not able to finish or bear through. So I'm wondering on reflection,
yeah.
Is there anything that we could do as supervisors from recruitment stage to the process of the supervision to make sure we retain these students to get them to the finish line?
And I think some of that has to do with giving them small successes along the way. So giving them the opportunity to present at conferences where they get to travel. And so where they get to go to Chicago to present their work. It's kind of a perk of the job that they get to go on to an international meeting. And then I think having them have successes. So once you taste success, it's really exciting to have your work published. And so doing a systematic review or a scoping review early on in their project and they get it published, I think that helps fuel that desire because these are a little bit of carrots that people get along the way. So I think that's one of the ways in which and then really you have meeting with them regularly to hold them to be accountable, helping them to solve their problems, helping them to encouraging them to solve their own problems. But I think for me, that's probably the biggest thing is that they have to kind of feel as grads, there's lots of memes and different things out there about how challenging grad school can be and that but if they don't ever feel like there's a perk of the job, and I think you have to we went to Scotland for one conference where my student presented and it's she was never been there before. She actually brought her mom along with her, right? And she did a little bit of travel. And I think that kind of, you're paying them $30,000 a year, the fact that you can get a trip there. Mind you, she found the cheapest flight I didn't think was even possible to get there. I was like, how did you get there without a low amount of money? Right. And so, but I think that is one of the things is that they have to feel those successes, getting a travel award or getting an award for your work, those recognitions. So the small successes, I think, gets them maybe a little bit addicted to get the success.
And just one follow-up question. I'm quite surprised with that medical student who started on MSc. Then admitted to medical schools and they had to stop the master's program. I know. So
that's changed. Alan Underhill has actually been instrumental in bringing forward that that they can continue. So that, but it didn't used to be the case.
No, but I know we had a couple of medical students who are approved to do the masters.
That's correct. Yeah, so that's, I
And
think
that's,
just
that,
in the
and
last couple of years.
I'm glad to hear that, because that's a really tough situation to be
What do
in.
you have to say about the clinician investigator program? Which is really an opportunity for many of our residents.
Yeah.
They don't often take on the opportunity.
I think the clinical investigator program is a really great thing as well. I think that surgery for a long time was a lot better than medicine at actually harnessing it. And so that had to do a little bit with I think it was Dave Bigham who was the chair of that, or the director for that program. And they actually made it almost mandatory, to be fair. And so I've tried to encourage the GI residents when I was program director for years to do CIP. I think sometimes in Canada, medical doctors get paid very well to do clinical work, and academic work is not always paid as well. And I think so we have to I think you have to bring in the love of it, right? So for me, Dr. Fedoruk was a huge role model. I always joke with him. He has a fake bachelor's because he got into med school before he finished his bachelor's. So I always say that he had a fake bachelor degree, and he knows. I told him many times. I teased him. But I think there's not many, the academic pathway is challenging, and it's hard. I think that's one of the other things. How do we encourage people to be on the academic track and to do this kind of work? Because I think it's really rewarding, but I'm not sure everybody else does. And if people look straight at the money, like in GI, you can make a lot more money just scoping than you can in supervising students. But I think for me, this has been a rewarding career, and I've enjoyed that kind of different parts to my job. And I wouldn't want to scope 4 days a week. I think that would be boring, to be honest, but different people like different things.
Well, and that's the part we need to start promoting, right? Is that, you get to, we all went into medicine for clinical work. We all love our clinical work, but you get to do these other things as well. It makes all the difference. For me, I know she sometimes tunes in. I don't know if she's there. It was Anne Fanning. She took me to Paris for the first time at an IUA TLD conference. And that was like, wow, right? It opens your eyes. Yeah. There's another comment here, question here. What have you found to be the most frustrating thing over your supervising career?
Oh, I think there's going to be frustrations or whatever. Obviously getting sued was probably one of the highlights of that. But I think that's probably a one-off thing. I don't think that's going to happen. I think it can be frustrating sometimes when the students don't want as much for them as you want from them. And so I think that's a little bit like wanting them to do more. And then on other hands, I think sometimes my students are more ambitious than I am. And so that's the rewarding side, because they encourage me to do stuff that I might not have done before. So they've actually pushed me to grow as much as sometimes I push some of them to grow. And so, but yeah, being sued is probably the highlight.
And probably students that maybe aren't as self-initiated can be a little bit of a frustration.
Dr. Bailey finds good ones.
Yeah, you haven't had to do that. There's a question around the checklist and so on. I would just encourage you to go to our Department of Medicine research site, and undergrad students, we've got all kinds of resources there. And at worst, just contact as Karen pointed out, domgrad at uab.ca. So that's specific to the Department of Medicine. You can find most of those in there. And then I guess we'll just end this way. You talked a little bit about encouraging our faculty. So we are developing, a more rigorous. We have a clinical scholars program, but a more rigorous one to try and promote residents to, sort of follow that pathway. But what about early career faculty? So there's a question here about early career faculty that maybe, just transition straight into clinical, but now are getting a little bit of a bug for academia. Do you have any career advice for those individuals?
Well, I think it's good to try out supervising research or whatever. So there's if you have residents do research with you, they're free. They're not as easy to I mean, call is difficult, and so they're not as easy to like rein in kind of thing, whereas a grad student is actually dedicated to you probably for 2 years. You can definitely get a project. The hardest part is probably making sure you have the money. And so I'm going to tell you, some of my source of funding has been like profits from clinical trials. So we do clinical trials in GI, we make money, it goes into this pot that we can use to spend for research. And so I like clinical research. It's not as innovative as I think investigator initiated research, but it actually is quite lucrative. And so you can use those funds to pay for graduate student things. And so that's one of the ways. And so I think the biggest barrier for people to take on a grad student is probably to know that they can and know that the department is all here. But it's also that money, because 30 grand for 1 year, it's like 60 grand for 2. If they get a scholarship of like 15,000, it's not going to cover, it's going to cover maybe half, but maybe not all of it. And so I think, to be honest, like money is probably the thing that makes the world go around. I think I also had startup funds as well, which I used for some of this, right? And so that's probably the biggest barrier, I think, is that because you do feel responsible for them. And if they don't finish in 2 years, you got to keep paying them. So it's not like it's just that. And so there's a little bit of uncertainty in that. And so, my mentor for life said, never let money stand in your way. That was his advice to me. But I think it does sometimes feel a little bit daunting to take on a student with that kind of financial responsibility.
Yeah, I would say the same thing, that, we are very lucky within our department, our faculty, college and institution. There are sources of funding for graduate students that, we can help with that. The other thing I think is to exactly what you said, is get a co-supervisor. If it's your first grad student.
You need to have one. Actually,
Yeah. So, if it feels daunting, get somebody.
And they'll help you. Yeah.
Exactly. Okay, so with that, I guess we will close. And once again, Karen, congratulations on all your accomplishments and all that.